They always said our street looked like something out of a movie. Tree-lined, pristine, and so quiet you could hear the whisper of sprinklers at dawn. But no one ever talks about what it costs to keep a picture-perfect world from cracking, especially when the cracks start inside your own family. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm 38, a senior accountant in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I've learned to calculate everything: risk, taxes, hidden liabilities. But nothing prepared me for the emotional math of family debt. It started with a single phone call. My mother, Judith, called while I was sorting spreadsheets after dinner. "Sweetheart," she cooed, the way she does when she's about to ask for something I won't want to give. "Emily's wedding. It's finally happening." Emily, my younger sister, the golden one, the one who got applause for showing up late and laughter when she flubbed through life. I love her, I do. But let's just say, she doesn't exactly know how to stretch a dollar or finish what she starts. "That's great," I said carefully, already anticipating the ask. "It's going to be so magical," she gushed. "Outdoor ceremony, custom altar, string quartet, and a floral arch inspired by Meghan Markle's wedding." I blinked. Mom continued like a runaway train. "Of course, your father and I can't swing the whole thing, and Emily's budget is, well, she's between jobs again. So I told her she could count on you to help." I set down my wine glass. "To help, how?" There was a pause. "Half," she said breezily. "Half the wedding, Reba. You're her big sister. This is what family does. Besides, you're the one with the good job." There it was. The job card. I tried to stay calm. "Mom, that's tens of thousands of dollars. Has Emily even priced venues yet? Photographers?" She found this darling vineyard. "Mom, don't be so cold, Rebecca. She only wants one perfect day. You had your chance, remember?" Oof, that stung. I hadn't had a wedding. I was engaged once, years ago. It didn't end well. But that's another story. Point is, my wedding fund had quietly become a rainy day account. Or so I thought. "You're not doing this for Emily," I said. "You're doing it because you want a storybook moment. For the neighbors? For your Facebook friends?" Judith sniffed. "Don't be cruel." I could feel myself slipping into old patterns, calculating how much guilt this would cost me, and how much peace I'd lose if I said no. I exhaled. "I'll cover half, but there has to be a real budget. No fantasy numbers." "Of course, sweetheart. And your father's agreed to manage the spreadsheet himself. He wants it to be efficient, like a proper project." I should have known then. Nothing about this would be proper. But I said yes. Because I always say yes. Because it's easier than arguing. Because there's something intoxicating about being needed, even if it's for all the wrong reasons. So I wired the first $8,000 a week later. And just like that, I became the silent financier of my sister's fairy tale. The invitations hadn't even been designed yet, and I could already feel the tension brewing like a summer monsoon. Can you imagine being guilted into sponsoring a wedding you didn't even ask to be part of? Would you have said yes? Or drawn a line? Let me know in the comments. Because this was only the beginning. You know that sinking feeling when something looks organized on paper? But in reality, it's a mess hidden behind bullet points and color-coded tabs? That was Dad's wedding budget spreadsheet. He emailed it with the subject line, "Emily's Dream Wedding, Financial Strategy Version 1, 1 inch." The attachment was a proud 5-tab Excel workbook, complete with pivot tables and Gantt charts. Very him. David, my father, was a retired civil engineer. Projects were his love language. Unfortunately, so was controlling the narrative. "Rebecca," he'd said on the phone, "I've got it all mapped out. You'll love how clean the layout is." Except the first thing I noticed, the totals didn't match. The venue estimate had jumped from $5,000 to $8,400. And the floral tab, originally budgeted at $2,000, had tripled. A custom altar had been added under a vague line item called Ambience Enhancement. And somehow the catering now included an oyster bar. I called him immediately. "Dad, these numbers are off. You said we'd cap florals at $2,000. "Oh, that," he said, like I was quibbling over parking change. "The florist offered us an upgrade. You should have seen Emily's face. Like someone told her she could fly. How could I say no to that? Because we agreed on limits, I said, forcing calm into my voice. It's just flowers, Rebecca. Besides, the overage was only, what, $3,800? Nothing we can't absorb. We? There was no we here. My half of this wedding was starting to look like a full-on takeover, and my parents were already calling the shots with my checkbook. Dad, that's not how budgets work. We set a ceiling for a reason. He sighed with that weary, patronizing tone. I thought accountants were supposed to be flexible under pressure. That's when I felt it, that slow, familiar erosion. It's not just about money. It's the constant implication that saying no means I'm heartless, that logic is cold, that feelings should trump finances, at least when they want something. I stared at the spreadsheet long after we hung up. The numbers weren't just slipping. They were being rewritten in real time, like some magical fairy tale logic had taken hold. If we just believe hard enough, the money will appear. But it wasn't magic. It was me, quietly covering line after line, hoping if I kept the peace, they'd notice my effort, maybe even appreciate it. They didn't. The next week, David hired a lighting artist for the reception. Without asking, I found out from the deposit invoice, forwarded to me with a winking emoji. It's just ambiance, he wrote. A small indulgence. And technically, lighting counts as safety too, right? That's when I knew. He wasn't budgeting. He was building a fantasy and drafting me to fund it. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' place to review receipts. As I walked into their kitchen, I overheard him on the phone. Rebecca? She's got plenty saved. Single, no kids. Her money's just sitting there. My breath caught. I wasn't a person in that moment. I was a bank account with a birth certificate, a line item on their family legacy spreadsheet. I left without saying a word. And the worst part? I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to burn it down. Not until I knew just how deep the lies ran. If you've ever been publicly humiliated without warning, then you'll understand what I mean when I say, it's not the moment that stings the most. It's the slow replay afterward, when your brain won't stop rolling the scene back like it's trying to rewrite history. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of day where the Scottsdale sun hits just right, glowing over the red tile roofs and manicured lawns, as if nothing bad could possibly happen in a place so pristine. I should have known better. Emily's pre-wedding brunch was being held at the Camelback Country Club. My mother had insisted it be casually elegant, code for expensive with the illusion of effortlessness. The guest list included Emily's college friends, extended family, and a scattering of local socialites my parents had somehow wrangled in. You'll sit next to the journalist, Judith had told me days before. He's doing a local feature on unique wedding traditions. The story will be great PR for the family. PR for our family. As if we were a brand. I wore a soft peach blouse and cream slacks. Understated. Respectable. But walking into that room, I felt like I was wearing a blinking neon sign. Sponsor. Because every time someone clinked a mimosa glass or complimented the decor, they glanced at me, the invisible engine beneath Emily's perfect ride. I smiled politely, even as my stomach turned. The journalist, a man in his early 30s named Chase, was friendly enough, if a little too rehearsed. You must be Rebecca, he said, flipping open his notepad. The older sister, right? The financier. This whole thing's quite the event. He chuckled like we were in on a private joke. I gave a tight smile. Just helping out where I can. According to your mom, you're the numbers wizard behind the scenes, he said. That's rare. Most sisters would be jealous. Jealous? He grinned. Well, yeah. I mean, she's the bride. You're the accountant. One's in the spotlight, the other's handling receipts. I forced a laugh, even though my ears were burning. Chase scribbled something and leaned closer. Mind if I quote you for the article? We're calling it The Spinster Sister. Sponsors the storybook. Has a cheeky ring to it, don't you think? Spinster. That word hit me like a slap across the face. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? Oh, just a working title, he said quickly, holding up his hands. You know, to add some flair. Everyone loves a little drama. Before I could respond, I heard giggling behind me. I turned. At the next table, two of Emily's friends, draped in pastel-wrapped dresses, identical blowouts, and smug smirks, were clearly eavesdropping. One whispered loudly, "She's the bitter sister, right? The one who never got married." The other snorted. Guess that makes this her wedding, too. Half the cost, none of the dress. Laughter rippled down the table. And still, no one said anything. Not Emily. Not my parents. Not even the distant cousin who'd once cried on my shoulder after her divorce. I felt frozen. My fork hovered mid-air, hand trembling. My throat thickened with the kind of hurt that doesn't register until you're alone. Staring at yourself in a bathroom mirror, wondering how people who know you could reduce you to a punchline. But I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I swallowed. I smiled. I let the brunch finish. Afterward, as guests drifted toward the exit, Emily caught up to me near the dessert table, her voice low and sing-song sweet. "Don't be mad," she said. "It's just, people love a good narrative. You're the supportive sister. It's a nice role for you." A role. I stared at her. "You knew about the article?" She shrugged. "Mom wanted press. Chase delivers. It's not personal." "Not personal," I repeated. "They called me a spinster." "You're not, obviously," she said, brushing non-existent lint off her designer dress. "But it's just a word, Beck. Let it go." But I couldn't, because that moment told me everything. They weren't grateful. They were entertained. I wasn't a sister. I was a storyline. The dutiful, lonely woman funding the fairy tale so the favorite could shine. And the worst part? I had volunteered for this. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel harder than necessary, watching the immaculate houses slide past. And somewhere deep in my chest, a flicker of something burned. Not rage, not sadness. Resolve. They wanted a storybook wedding? Fine. But I was done being the quiet footnote. I didn't sleep that night. The brunch replayed in my head like a scratched record. Chase's smirk, the whispers, Emily's tone, the way her words were dipped in frosting and rot. I lay in bed, the ceiling fan spinning above me, wondering when exactly I became an accessory in my own life, a walking checkbook in sensible heels. By morning, I'd made a decision. No more auto payments. No more blind transfers. I emailed Emily's wedding planner and requested a full itemized list of upcoming expenses. Then I opened my budgeting software and adjusted everything. Caps on venue upgrades, limits on vendor gratuities, floral revisions. Cold, meticulous control. It helped me breathe. But there was one piece I hadn't locked down: my parents' financial contributions, or lack thereof. The house I grew up in, the one they still lived in, sat proudly in the same cul-de-sac where I now owned my own townhouse. That place was my childhood. The arched windows, the creaky staircase, the dining room where Emily used to steal bites of my homework snacks before sprinting out to cheer practice. It was also where they told me, 6 months ago, that they were managing just fine and didn't need help with the wedding. That this was for Emily, and they'd chip in a little. I believed them. Because parents don't lie about things like that, right? So when I asked Dad for the latest mortgage statement, just to cross-reference numbers, his voice on the other end turned tight. "What do you need that for?" "I'm reviewing allocations," I said, keeping it vague. "If we're adjusting Emily's floral plan, I just want to make sure we're staying liquid. You mentioned the refinancing last year, and I'd like to update my file." There was a pause, then a long sigh. "Rebecca," he said, "is this really necessary? Do you have it or not?" Another pause. "We'll find it." But they didn't. Not that day, not the next. 3 days later, I went over in person. Mom was in the kitchen, pretending to read the newspaper, while Emily watched a wedding highlight reel on her tablet, humming along to a string quartet soundtrack. Dad was in his office, staring at his monitor, clicking endlessly on email tabs like he could make a statement magically appear. "Dad," I said, "can I see the mortgage file?" He didn't look at me. "There's been a delay. I'll get it to you." "No," I said. "We're not doing this dance. I need it now." Mom called from the kitchen. "Rebecca, don't make this unpleasant." I walked past her, straight into the office. I opened the file drawer myself, and what I found was nothing. The mortgage folder was empty, not just missing a few pages, completely empty. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice like ice. Dad stood, bracing his palms on the desk. "You don't understand the full situation. Then explain it." He looked at the floor. Mom appeared in the doorway, her voice soft and falsely soothing. "We've had a rough few months. Your father's consulting projects dried up, and the reserve fund we were using. She trailed off. Are you behind on the mortgage? I asked. The silence was a scream. How far behind? Dad finally spoke. 5 months. I felt my stomach plummet. 5 months? You're that close to foreclosure and you've been spending my money on a luxury wedding. It's not like that, Mom rushed in. We just assumed. Assumed what? My voice broke. That I'd cover it? Like always? You're doing well, Dad said quietly. You're stable. We thought. I stepped back, breath shallow. You used my savings. You let me believe we were planning a dream, and you were covering your collapse with imported orchids and caviar canapes. We didn't mean to deceive you, Mom whispered. You just didn't feel like telling me the truth. I turned toward the door, then stopped. What about your pension? I asked. It's been going to support the credit cards, Dad admitted. And the house? He looked away. They were drowning. And instead of asking for help, they had shoved me into the deep end, smiling the whole time. I left the house without another word. The sun outside felt offensive, bright, artificial, like a spotlight on a stage one never auditioned for. Back home, I sat in my kitchen with the blinds drawn and stared at the wall, the weight of it pressed down, months of enabling, of choosing peace over principle. They weren't just mismanaging, they were exploiting, all in the name of family, all behind a floral arch of lies. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember picking up my keys or grabbing my phone, but somehow I found myself back in my car, engine running, hands clenched around the steering wheel. The numbers swirled in my head like a migraine, 5 months behind, credit cards drained, and my money bleeding into a wedding that was being marketed like a lifestyle brand. I drove, not to cool off, not to think, because thinking would have led to screaming, and I wasn't sure I'd stop once I started. I drove to the venue. It was a sprawling estate vineyard, tucked just beyond the edge of Scottsdale, all sweeping oaks and white gravel paths. I'd signed the first deposit with my own signature, transferred the down payment from my personal account. As I walked the grounds, I saw the altar they'd started building. It wasn't what we'd agreed on. Not even close. This was not the $2,500 minimalist wood arch with soft linens and climbing roses I had signed off on. This was a custom-carved, 3-tiered monstrosity, complete with imported teak panels, draped silks, and sculpted floral columns. It looked like something out of a royal pageant, and it reeked of someone trying to impress strangers more than celebrate family. A staff member, young and cheerful, approached me. "Oh, are you Rebecca, the sister of the bride?" I nodded slowly. "We were told you'd be covering the remaining balance for the altar enhancement today." My blood ran cold. "Enhancement?" "Yes," she chirped. "Your father submitted the revised invoice and mentioned you'd handle it. The artist flew in from Santa Fe last week. He's very sought after." I barely heard her after that. My mind was already spinning. They'd taken my agreement, my budgeted, clear-headed agreement, and twisted it into a blank check. No consultation, no notice. Just the arrogant assumption that my signature could be forged in intention, if not in ink. "I won't be paying for this," I said quietly, my voice sharper than I expected. The girl blinked. I can get the manager. Please do." While I waited, I walked around the structure. It was beautiful, and it was completely wrong. Not just financially, but philosophically. This altar, this statement piece, wasn't built for vows, it was built for photos. When the manager finally approached, an older woman named Carmen, I explained the situation. She was gracious, but firm. "The changes were made per your father's request. The final invoice has already been split and assigned to your account." "He had no authority to do that," I said. "The financial agreement is between your vendor and me personally." Carmen pursed her lips. "Then you'll want to speak with our contracts officer." So I did. It took 2 hours, 3 cups of burned lobby coffee, and a printout of every receipt and wire transfer I'd made. But by the time I left, I had signed a formal revocation of financial consent on any further modifications, past, present, or pending. If my father wanted to play executive producer of The Emily Show, he could fund it himself. Of course, I already knew he couldn't, which meant someone else had already paid the difference. I found the answer later that evening, in the form of a glossy catalog on my parents' dining room table. The cover read, "Estate Elegance, Furniture for Hosting at its Finest." Inside were photos of a full living room suite, velvet chaise lounges, Italian sideboards, glass sculptures shaped like flickering flames. My mother caught me staring at it. "We thought the house should reflect the elegance of the occasion," she said softly, already defensive. "You used my money. It's still for the family, Rebecca, for when guests visit after the wedding." I turned slowly. "You reallocated wedding funds, without telling me. For furniture?" She didn't deny it, didn't blink, just stood there in her new sandals, arms folded, waiting for me to understand. "It's not a betrayal," she said, as if that made it true. "It's an investment in presentation." I laughed, one short, stunned laugh. "Presentation. This is what families do," she added. "We make sacrifices for appearances." And there it was. The truth. Not just about the wedding. About everything. Every decision made in that house had always come down to how it looked from the outside. What neighbors might think. What Facebook might admire. Even my exhaustion, my bank account, my name on invoices, none of it mattered as long as Emily's altar shimmered in the sunset and the parlor smelled like designer linen spray. I left without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. Because something had crystallized inside me. They didn't want a family. They wanted a brand. And I was done funding it. I was in my office, staring at my bank statement for the third time, when his name lit up my phone. Elliot Harris. A name I hadn't seen in years. It stopped me cold. I hadn't spoken to Elliot since we broke off our engagement 6 years ago. Not out of anger. Just life moving on. In two very different directions. He'd gone into real estate law and left Arizona shortly after we ended things. I buried myself in work, spreadsheets, and building a life too structured to break. But there his name was, glowing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Rebecca," he said, his voice a little older, a little softer, but still Elliot. "Hey, I hope this isn't a bad time." "It's a surprise," I managed, heart fluttering with unease. "Is everything okay?" I was catching up with my sister. She still lives in Scottsdale. "Apparently your family's wedding saga is the talk of the HOA. I let out a humorless laugh. "Of course it is." He paused. "I also heard your parents are months behind on the mortgage and spending your money like it grows in your backyard." That one cut straight through. I closed my eyes. "So the gossip trail's healthy, I see." "Rebecca," he said gently, "I didn't call to dig. I called because I think I can help." I opened my eyes. "With what?" "Protecting your finances. Your property. Yourself." I leaned back in my chair. I already confronted them. Cut off the payments, revoked permissions, froze the escrow flow to the wedding vendors. "Good start," he said. "But you need more than bandages. You need legal protection. They've already used your money without consent. That's grounds for action. And if your name is on anything connected to their home, they could drag you down with them." I frowned. "I'm not on the deed." "Are you sure?" My stomach turned. Because suddenly, I wasn't. When I was 24, my parents refinanced the house and asked me to co-sign temporarily to get a better rate. I was just starting out in my career and flattered they trusted me, but I never followed up. Never thought I needed to. It was supposed to come off the paperwork a year later. "Do you want me to check the deed for you?" Elliot asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yes," I whispered. "Please." He had access to the county property records, and within an hour he confirmed what I had somehow blocked out of memory. My name was still on the title. Technically, I was a partial owner of the house, which meant the foreclosure didn't just threaten them, it could touch me, my credit, my legal liability, my financial future. "They've put you at risk," Elliot said. "If you want out, I can draft a transfer of interest and submit it with an escrow freeze. But you have to act now, before things get worse." I looked around my office. Neatly stacked files, photos of past tax seasons on the wall, my tidy little life, all of it hanging by a thread I hadn't even known was fraying. "How much would it cost?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "I'll do it pro bono." Honestly, After everything you've done for that family, someone should be looking out for you. I blinked, caught off guard by the kindness. You really don't have to. I want to, he said. And for the first time in weeks, something inside me eased. Not just because someone was offering to help, but because someone remembered who I was, outside of the narrative my parents had crafted. The next morning, I met Elliot at a quiet cafe near the county recorder's office. He had already prepared the documents, one to relinquish my interest in their property, the other to report financial misrepresentation that affected a co-owner. The second one's optional, he said, sliding the papers across the table. But if they've used your name or credit in any way you didn't authorize, it'll protect you going forward. I signed both. It wasn't emotional. It was strategic, necessary. Still, when I handed the papers back, I felt something shift, like a tether finally cutting loose. They'll find out soon, I murmured, when the notices start arriving. Elliot nodded. You ready for that? I met his eyes. I wasn't ready for any of this. But now? I'm not letting them bury me in the name of family loyalty. He gave a slow smile. There she is. I smiled too. For real this time. Not for show, not for brunch. Just for me. I didn't know what came next. I didn't have a roadmap for the fallout. But as I walked back to my car, the Arizona sun warming the hood, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace, not quite, but power. And I was finally holding it in my own hands. I didn't tell anyone, not Emily, not my parents, not even the wedding planner. Let them have their cake tastings, their centerpiece mock-ups, their ridiculous countdown apps. While they curated the fantasy, I moved in the background like a shadow. Precise, silent, dangerous. It took 2 business days for the escrow freeze to process. Elliot handled everything through a private firm, flagging my name on the mortgage as compromised due to unapproved financial exposure. The bank reviewed our claim and found more than enough irregularities to place the account under scrutiny. I'd expected hesitation. There was none. I wasn't just a cosigner. I was a silent guarantor, and they'd been draining the house's equity without informing me. Now, the money valve was off, which meant every wedding vendor tied to that home, floral consultants, catering staff, lighting engineers, would hit a wall when they tried to invoice the next installment. They'd all call David, and I'd be waiting. The night before the wedding, I stayed home. There was no rehearsal dinner for me to attend. Judith had called earlier that week and left a breezy voicemail. We figured it'd be easier if you sat this one out, Reba. Keeps the focus where it should be, on the bride. It was her way of saying, we know you're upset, but play nice and stay invisible. So I did, but not in the way they expected. I spent that evening watching clouds roll across the desert horizon, fingers curled around a mug of mint tea, while a different kind of storm prepared to unfold across town. The bank had agreed to send the initial audit notification the following morning, just in time to greet the newlywed celebration like a guest who hadn't been invited but refused to leave. And me? I planned to sit right through it all, head held high. The next morning I arrived at the vineyard alone. I wore a navy dress. Clean lines, no frills, no attempt to outshine or blend in. I was done playing roles. The ceremony was set in full bloom. Roses twisted into arches, silver chairs lined with cream satin bows, a string quartet tuning gently near the altar. Guests were already seated, and I could feel their eyes flicking toward me as I approached. Curious, uncertain, maybe even confused. After all, wasn't I the bitter sister who bailed? The awkward accountant who couldn't take a joke? I didn't care. I found my seat 3 rows back. On the aisle. Perfect line of sight. Judith didn't notice me until she walked Emily down the path, arm gently linked with hers. Her expression flickered the moment she saw me, just for a second. But it was enough. A shiver of calculation ran through her eyes. David was standing near the altar, puffed up like he owned the day. He took the mic for his speech with the same swagger I'd seen in boardrooms, living rooms, and brunches. My daughter, he began, has always known how to honor tradition. She values legacy. She understands what it means to be family. My jaw tensed. He paused for effect, eyes scanning the crowd with theatrical warmth. And in a world where people chase independence over connection, where selfishness is packaged as strength, Emily reminds us what it means to put family first. That was it. The final slap. The polite, polished condemnation disguised as praise. The golden child held up like a mirror to shame the reflection they never wanted to acknowledge. Me. I stood. No fanfare, no theatrics. I just stood. The silence fell fast, like a curtain. David faltered mid-sentence. Eyes locked on mine. Judith looked like someone had sucked the air from her lungs. Emily's smile froze, somewhere between perfect and strained. And I turned. No anger, no tears. I just walked away, past the guests, past the altar. Down the aisle they'd denied me months earlier, each step a reminder. They had wanted silence. They'd get it, but on my terms now. No more funding the fantasy. No more applause for performance. By the time I reached the parking lot, the first bank notification had already been delivered. The audit had begun. And as the sun warmed my skin, I felt no guilt. Just a quiet, steady freedom. It was still early when the knock came. Not frantic. Not panicked, just hard enough to suggest urgency, and controlled enough to telegraph rage. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, barefoot on the cool tile floor. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush. I took a sip, inhaled slowly, and then walked to the door. On the porch, 2 uniformed sheriff's officers. Behind them, parked crookedly at the curb, was a county vehicle marked Property Enforcement. The taller officer tipped his hat. "Ms. Rebecca Wallace?" "That's me. We're here to serve notice of a deed transfer under judicial review. It concerns the property located at 104 Briarwood Lane, my parents' house, my childhood home." One of the officers extended the folder. I took it, my fingers steady despite the tremble in my chest. "Ms. Wallace," the second officer added, "we're also notifying the current occupants. Legally, you're now the recorded owner. Due to misrepresented co-ownership and financial abuse, the court granted emergency reassignment until further arbitration." I nodded, barely hearing him. Because behind the sheriffs, down the street, I saw them, David and Judith, standing frozen in the driveway. Mom, still in her robe, holding a phone like it might explain this away. Dad, wearing yesterday's dress shirt, creased and unbuttoned, his mouth opening and closing as the officers approached them with copies of the order. Emily was there too, hair unbrushed, face blotchy from crying. She looked straight at me from across the cul-de-sac, not with guilt, not even disbelief, with fury. I didn't go over. I didn't wave. I didn't offer apologies or explanations. I simply stepped back inside and shut the door. Minutes later, the shouting began. It came in waves. First my father, bellowing about public shame and ruined reputations. Then my mother, shrill and breathless, her voice rising into those octaves reserved for operatic guilt. But it wasn't until the front door of my house rattled with pounding fists that I moved again. I opened it, slowly. David's face was red, his hair wild, his eyes bloodshot. "How dare you?" he hissed, voice shaking. "You've humiliated us. You've humiliated me. You humiliated yourself," I said evenly. I just pulled the curtain back. He pointed toward the street, toward the house. "You brought sheriffs to your own parents' door." "No," I corrected. "I brought consequences. Something I should have done years ago." Emily stormed up next, tears streaking her cheeks. "You ruined my wedding," she spat. "You couldn't just let me have this one thing. You couldn't just stay quiet?" I looked at her. This sister I used to braid hair for, cover for, defend in front of teachers. And I felt nothing. Not hatred, not pity. Just the hollow absence of shared truth. "I gave you more than one thing," I said softly. "I gave you a wedding. I gave you a house. I gave you my name on documents you never earned. What did you give back?" She said nothing. Judith stepped forward, voice trembling with restraint. "Rebecca, this isn't justice. This is vindictiveness. Family doesn't do this. Family doesn't lie," I shot back. "Family doesn't exploit. And family doesn't turn one daughter into an ATM so the other can be Cinderella for a day." David's voice was low now, deadly calm. "Do you know what people are saying? They think we're bankrupt. They think we cheated our daughter." "You did," he flinched. "Finally," I straightened. "I gave you a chance, to be honest, to ask for help like adults. Instead, you padded invoices and bought imported furniture with money meant for vows and guests. He looked at the ground. Emily's voice cracked. What are we supposed to do now? I let the question hang. She wasn't asking for guidance. She was begging for restoration, for everything to go back to before. But before was a lie, a glossy, curated illusion built on my silence. You figure it out, I said, just like I had to, just like you expected me to. Judith opened her mouth again, but I was already closing the door, not slamming it, just ending it, because there were no more speeches, no more pleas. I stood inside my house, alone, quiet, unshaken, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the bitter sister. I felt like the only adult in the room. They didn't come back the next day, not in person anyway, but the messages started at sunrise. My email pinged with subject lines like, "This isn't what we meant," and "Can we just talk?" And the real masterpiece from Judith, "Please don't turn the neighbors against us," as if the neighbors needed my help. By noon, the homeowners' Facebook group was ablaze with speculation, some of it accurate, some wildly dramatic. My favorite post was from Mrs. Carruthers, 2 doors down. It's always the perfect families that hide the biggest messes. And here I thought the Wallace house would end up in a magazine. But public perception wasn't what mattered to me anymore. That used to be my mother's domain, controlling the narrative, polishing the image, silencing the cracks. I wasn't patching over anything anymore. The next evening, I went to the house, not to fight, not to argue. I simply wanted to walk through the rooms, alone, to see what was left of the life I'd unintentionally subsidized for so long. They weren't there. Judith and David had taken a few essentials and moved into a short-term rental, courtesy of a family friend. The furniture was still in place, sleek, expensive, sterile. Imported velvet and hand-carved side tables, gleaming under staged lighting. It all looked ridiculous now, like an overpriced theater set abandoned after the final performance. I wandered through the kitchen. The new marble backsplash caught the last of the sunset. My reflection stared back, faint and distant. In the dining room, I found a guest list still taped to the hutch. Wallace Lane wedding weekend. VIP attendees. Emily had labeled the top in calligraphy, stars drawn next to the names of influential guests. I scanned the list. My name wasn't on it. Of course it wasn't. I sat in the living room for a while, where the scent of lavender still clung to the throw pillows. I closed my eyes and tried to remember a version of this space where we laughed, where holidays didn't come with a price tag, where I hadn't been slowly taught that silence was the currency of love. I couldn't find that memory. Not clearly. Maybe it never existed. The next morning, Emily showed up at my door. No warning, no makeup, hair tied back. She looked tired, like the gloss had worn off. I didn't invite her in. We stood in the doorway, just like we had so many times growing up. Back then, it was to trade borrowed clothes or whisper secrets. Now, she held a single envelope in her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly. "What is it?" I asked. "It's the bridal vendor receipts," she said, "and a check for the remaining amount we owe you." I blinked. "You wrote me a check?" "No," she said, her voice small. "Elliot did. He fronted the balance after I explained what happened. I'm paying him back in installments." I was quiet. "He said I should settle my debts before asking for anything else," she added. I stared at her for a long time. Why now? Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall, because it finally hit me. The wedding was never about love. It was about performance. And you were the only one who didn't clap. I took the envelope slowly. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe I was just carrying more than money in that moment. "I don't need an apology," I said. "Not anymore. I needed action. This is all I can do right now." I nodded. She turned to leave, then paused. "Do you think someday we'll talk again? Really talk?" I looked at her, at the woman who had once braided friendship bracelets with me on the back porch, and who'd later reduced me to a punchline for strangers. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But if we do, it has to be with the truth in the room." She gave a small nod. "Fair enough." When she walked away, I didn't watch her go. I just closed the door gently, the envelope still in my hand, and leaned against the wood. Not victorious, not defeated, just clearer. Like for the first time in my life, I could finally hear my own voice in the silence they used to fill. The house was mine now, legally, financially, emotionally, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not exactly. I sat on the edge of the master bed one morning, bare feet pressed to the cold floorboards, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly overhead. Every corner of this house bore traces of the people I used to believe were my foundation. The laughter in the hallway, the Sunday dinners at that long oak table, the holiday mornings when we all wore matching pajamas like we actually got along. Now it was quiet, too quiet. I walked through each room again, not out of necessity, but because I needed to face what I'd inherited. Not just the deed, but the echo of a dynamic I had finally broken. The guest room still smelled faintly, like Judith's perfume, powdery, floral, always a little too strong. In the den, David's bookshelf remained perfectly ordered by size, not subject, because appearance always mattered more than understanding. His framed engineering awards sat smugly beside photos of Emily's cheerleading competitions, none of which I'd ever seen displayed in my own home. In the back hallway, I found a storage bin labeled Rebecca College. Inside, a stack of old report cards, one ribbon from a state math competition, a copy of my first resume. None of it had ever made it onto a wall. Funny how the things they claimed to be proud of were always tucked away in boxes. That evening, I hosted no one. I didn't post an update. I didn't share a victory lap on social media. I just cooked. One dish, enough for me. Sat at the dining room table with a glass of wine, and let the silence stretch without guilt. That was the strangest part. How much room peace actually took up once you stopped shrinking to make space for other people's comfort. I didn't block my family. Not entirely. But I muted every group thread. My mother sent passive-aggressive links to rebuilding trust after family estrangement. My father, to his rare credit, had gone radio silent. I think he finally understood that I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was done. And Emily? She'd gone quiet too after that final drop-off. I had no illusions that she and I would reconnect overnight. A check could settle a balance, but it didn't repair a betrayal. Not one, built over years, over birthday slides and wedding toasts that cut instead of celebrated. That would take more than a bank transaction. Maybe it would never happen. I was learning to be okay with that. One night, about a week later, I opened my email to find a message from Elliot. Subject: Your power, Rebecca. I hope you've taken a moment to realize what you've done. Not just legally, but personally. You reclaimed a narrative that was never fair to begin with. You held people accountable who built an entire family structure around you, staying quiet. And you did it without stooping to their level. That takes strength, more than I think you even know. If you ever want to talk, not about deeds or escrow or litigation, but just life, let me know. I'd like to hear what your next chapter sounds like. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I finally understood something about power. It wasn't about dominance, or winning, or walking out during a toast just to watch the world tilt. Power was knowing who you are when no one else is clapping. And I was finally standing in that quiet with both feet. No applause, no spotlight, just me. And the house that no longer echoed with someone else's version of me. It wasn't closure, but it was control. And for once, that was enough. Spring crept into Scottsdale slowly, like it was unsure it was welcome. The desert air softened. The evenings stretched longer. And still, I found myself waking early, before the sun, before the noise, before the need to explain myself to anyone. The house was quieter now in a different way. Not the heavy silence of betrayal or abandonment, but the gentle kind that comes with ownership of the house, of my choices, of my story. I spent my mornings on the back patio with coffee and a notebook, something I hadn't done in years. I wasn't journaling, not exactly, more like unraveling, letting everything I'd carried, resentment, confusion, duty, guilt, spill out one sentence at a time. I kept circling back to a question I never asked when this all began. Who do I become when no one else is writing my role? Because for so long, I was the helper, the fixer, the background pillar of someone else's highlight reel. And when I stopped holding up the fantasy, it collapsed like wet paper. That collapse left something raw, something honest in its place. One Sunday afternoon, I hosted my own version of a family gathering. Only this time, it wasn't about obligation. It wasn't about proving anything. It was small. Maya brought dessert. Elliot came too. He stayed mostly quiet, respectful of the space, but he was there. So was Aunt Miriam, my mother's estranged sister, who'd sent me a handwritten note after the wedding fallout, saying simply, "I know what it's like to be the one who sees through the performance." We sat outside under string lights I'd installed myself, eating lemon cake and laughing about nothing at all. There were no floral arches, no curated speeches, no matching outfits, just people who saw me and chose to stay. That night, as they left one by one, I stood at the door watching them go, feeling something solid and unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not pride, not relief, peace. A few days later, I received another letter. This one from the bank. The official release. The house was mine alone. No co-signers. No shared claims. No hidden obligations. Final. Clean. I folded it slowly, pressed it into a file, and then, after a long pause, stood in the center of the hallway and spoke out loud, to no one. This is mine now. All of it. And I decide what stays. Not long after, I began donating things. The velvet furniture, the marble trays, the ridiculous imported chaise that cost more than my first car, gone. All of it. I replaced them with soft things. Real things. A mismatched love seat from a local artist. A bookshelf with visible nails. A kitchen table that felt like it could handle noise. Spilled wine. Elbows. And I put up new photos. Not the curated kind. Not proof of success kind. Just moments. Me and Maya at a fall market. A Polaroid of me holding a pizza box and laughing barefoot in the driveway. A grainy shot of Elliot helping me install a motion light. Both of us windblown and annoyed right before we burst out laughing. I didn't hear from Emily again, not directly, but I saw a post a few weeks later on her social media. She and her husband had moved into a small apartment across town. The caption read, "Starting fresh. Hard lessons. Real love. One day at a time." I didn't like it. I didn't comment. But I didn't feel angry. Just neutral. Which, in its own quiet way, felt like forgiveness. Not for what they did, but for what I let happen by staying silent for too long. Sometimes, power doesn't look like a grand finale. Sometimes, it's a quiet dinner table you chose. A mortgage paid on your terms. A voicemail you don't return. A mirror that finally reflects your own face, not the roles others wrote for you. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice. It was something deeper. It was freedom. And that, I learned, is what power really feels like.